In this video I will demonstrate a hand sewn blind hem. So first of all, you want to select a sewing needle that suits you. So just here I have a few there to just demonstrate the range of sizes. So needles come in different lengths and different widths. Some of them are thicker, some of them are thinner. This very long one is actually a beading needle, so it wouldn't usually be used, but it was more for demonstration purposes. So you want to find the type of needle that you like. There are two main types, the Crewel needles, which are for hand embroidery, and they're slightly more curved at the bottom, and then the sharps. So I prefer the sharps. They have a sharper point and I find it easier to catch the fabric. Other people prefer the Crewel needles, so maybe try both and see. The way you can tell the difference is that the eye of the needle is smaller on the sharps. The longer eyes on that needle would mean that it would be a Crewel needle. So in terms of threading the needle, I always get my thread and just get it so that there's only a very small piece in my finger. I do wet it, but really I hold it very close. There's only a tiny bit of thread there, and I kind of put the eye of the needle onto the thread, and I find that the easiest way to thread it, so that might be a little help. So when you're doing the blind hem is basically like an invisible hem. Blind hemming is the appropriate finish for lots of garments, particularly the bottoms of trousers and skirts. It is a light stitch. It isn't particularly strong, so it wouldn't be suitable for workwear, children's wear, anything that you need a lot of durability. But you know, suit trousers or women's trousers, skirts, things with a deep hem would often have a blind hem, and the result is nearly invisible on the front. You just see tiny little kind of puckers sometimes just where the little stitch is. So this is how to do it by hand. There are settings on the machine to do it. So you thread your needle. In this case I've used black so you can see it, and your hem would already be overlocked. I have a zigzag here to represent the overlocking. And when you are doing hand stitching, always remember not to take an extremely long thread. Keep it short-ish to your elbow at the longest. To start, you would knot the thread. So to do that, often you'd have a seam allowance somewhere that you would knot the thread onto. I'm just going to start here. So just below the overlocking is the position of where you would stitch. So I've taken one stitch there and take a second right next to it. And this will create a loop in your thread, and you go through that loop, and that knots it to the actual fabric. So that's a buttonhole stitch or buttonhole notch, buttonhole knot, and take a second one, create a second loop, and go through that. That's the best way to knot something to fabric. You don't want to just tie a knot on the end of your thread because it will just pull through. So it's more likely to look like this with pins. So you can just fold back the little edge of the fabric, and depending on the fabric it could be easier or harder to do this. So what you're going to do is take one thread, if you can, try and catch it just so that it's one thread on the needle. This is from the outer garment. Push your needle through. This is why it's sometimes nicer to have smaller, thinner needles. People like to have a fat needle at the start because they feel it can hold it, but it's harder to get it through fabric. So one little thread like that, then you can grab on this side one little thread here. Again, the position is usually just below the overlocking, or 0.5 centimeters down from whatever edge finish you have. Now on this one, you could take a couple of more threads, like it doesn't have to be just one thread because it is on the inside, but you don't want to take a large stitch because it is invisible. So So now I'm going back onto the outer fabric and I'm just grabbing another thread. And then I'm coming back. And then another thread. So there's a few stitches there. I've left them loose so you can see them, and so it does create a zigzag shape, just catching one tiny thread there. You might be able to see it. Even with the black thread, it's pretty much invisible. So that's why it's called a blind hem. And you continue on like that. Now, you want to be careful that you don't pull the stitching too tight. If you do that, you'll see on the front that it will kind of gather up and it will pucker. Sometimes you've stitched the whole hem and then you find that there's a kind of a pucker in it and you have to release it. So you want to keep the stitching at the correct tension, not too tight, but also you don't want it too loose either. So you don't want it to look like that and the hem would keep falling down. Okay, so you got to keep it just right, and depending on the fabric, calico it's kind of easier, but some of the fabrics a little bit harder to just get that tension correct. Also, you want to look at your spacing of your stitching. Okay, it might depend on the fabric how close or wide apart you want to go. In this case, these stitches are about 0.5 apart, for this one to that one and that one to this one, are 0.75. That would be generally a good size. You could make them a little bit smaller. You wouldn't want to go too much bigger, but it might depend a little bit on the weight of the fabric, and sometimes fabrics really show the stitching for some strange reason. There's just this big pucker, and so you might spread it out just the tiniest bit more so you don't see the pucker. Okay, so I'm just going to stitch along here and show you the end result. So another couple of things to watch out for is your position that you take your stitch. So when you take your stitch on the, just on the curve there, just under the overlocking, just be careful that you're not stitching up here, that you know that your stitch that you're taking on the outer fabric is right in line with this, maybe the fold that you folded down here. The pins sometimes get in the way and they catch around the thread. So here it is, fully stitched all the way across. That's what it looks like. This needs to get pushed back up, probably pressed. The calico creases like a piece of paper. So the other side, you can see just tiny little dots. Okay, and the spacing is around maybe 1 centimetre apart for those. Let's see, maybe give it a little bit of scale there for you. So about 1 centimetre, maybe a little bit over for each of these dots, which means that my stitching is staying to 0.5-ish on each stitch. So from there to there, 0.5, from there to there, 0.5. Okay. It can be hard to, measure, you can use your eye really for a while. What I did when I was learning was stitched a bit and then I measured to see how I was doing, and stitched another little while and then maybe just did a little measurement to check. Eventually your eye gets used to the measurement. Okay, so there you go. hand stitched blind hem. It does take time, so if you have a large hem, it's going to take you a long time. So designate a nice section of time and don't be trying to rush it. It's a slow process. Good luck with that.